Hey everybody, happy Spiritualist Saturday. I hope you guys had a fabulous week. Mine was definitely interesting, which is the inspiration for today's conversation. But I'm definitely slumming it a little bit. My hair is done at least, kind of. No makeup in one of my favorite Boston hoodies. Um, but who cares, right? We just have to have the conversation. And it is going to be a little bit of a quicker talk because I hurt my back. And so this is not, sitting up is not the most comfortable position for me right now. But I want to get this video to you guys because that is our commitment, right? So yeah, let's dive right in. So basically this week, so I have ongoing back and hip issues, but basically this week I don't even know how I did it. All of a sudden I was like, my back hurts, and it just progressively got worse. And after seeing my physiotherapist yesterday, I've severely sprained my back as well as popped out one of my SI joints. And so, needless to say, I've been pretty much immobile. Shout out to my amazing husband who actually took some time off to help me because I could not walk. Um, but yeah, that's not the conversation that it really got me thinking about was actually about emotions. Because I mean, I'm sure if any of you have had injuries, severe injuries, you know that it's a really interesting experience because it actually triggers certain emotions. So I knew this was a different injury than normal. So me popping out SI joints isn't necessarily that uncommon. But it's interesting because when it happens for me, my typical response when it's really severe is I'm really angry. Like, I mean, I can go from zero to rage in about 2 seconds, like, not even, like half a second. And so that is usually how I know, aside from the pain, that, okay, like, yes, it's time to just kind of relax and let this cool down and see physio. This time, however, it was really interesting. I actually it wasn't mad. It was actually just real sadness and what's the word? Um, Shoot, I can't remember the word right now, but just basically when you can't do anything, and so you're very reliant on other people. And it would be interesting, like a lot of crying. I just stop and cry when I couldn't, the pain was so bad. And I just found it such an interesting experience that it was so different. And it really got me thinking about emotions because emotions are, we always have them, right? Like they are with us all the time. And we live in a society that really tells us emotions are bad. Don't live by your emotions, ignore them, suppress them, overcome them, don't let them guide your life. And I don't agree with that. Now, I don't agree, I'm not saying, only listen to your emotions. I think I've previously said that. But what I am saying is that our emotions are there for a reason. And what I specifically want to talk about is how we label emotions, right? Because I shared the story with my back, not to feel sorry for me, but more as an example of when I have severe injuries, I have extreme emotions. And the emotions that come out are really ones that I think most people would deem as bad emotions, right? Anger being one of them. And if you think about it, most of the times we label things, we like to label things as good or bad. I mean, it's just kind of typically, we could probably apply this to anything, but specifically when it comes to emotions, good emotions would be happy, joyous, pleasant, laughing, fun, things that we think are good emotions. And then bad emotions would be sad, angry, depressed, revengeful, whatever, right? But we label them as bad. And the thing about emotions, and I think it's really interesting specifically when we label them, is when we label emotions are good or bad, it influences the way we respond to them. And so I would like you to even think about that for yourself. Like, do you label emotions as good or bad? And if so, how does that influence your response to those emotions? So specifically thinking about it, right? Like if we don't like anger, oftentimes when we feel anger, we won't want to express that anger, and then we judge ourselves for being so angry because it's not good to be angry, right? And oftentimes when we have negative emotions, people react, obviously it's very unique to every person, but broadly, you kind of have two categories, right? There are the people who overanalyze. It's like, oh my God, I feel off today, or I feel kind of sad, or I feel depressed, and they like sit in it and it overwhelms them and they are overcome by those emotions. And, how do I get rid of this? Because I can't have these bad emotions, right? I only need good emotions. Or you get people who completely ignore them and they suppress them, right? Like, if they're angry, they never express it. They suppress it. And typically those people blow up, or they have really extreme health issues that, ultimately I could think are really just fruitions of those emotions that are being suppressed. And so those are kind of two broad categories. But either way, it really is a disconnect between emotions, right? And for me, one of my goals is my belief system is that emotions are how our soul talks to us. Simply as that. Because if you think about it, if you believe in souls, like how else is our soul going to talk to us and communicate to us, right? And oftentimes, I just fully believe that that's through emotions. And so my goal in life is to learn how to experience emotions and listen to them without judgment, and not necessarily letting them rule my life, but as a guidance. And so what I mean by that, if you think about it, I'll give you an example. So let's say, and I'll give you a specific how this played out for me once. So, I'll just do it. Example. So I was talking to this guy, and he's somebody who is pretty close in terms of like social dynamics, I guess. And I was sitting talking with a group, and he started asking me about my mediumship, and it became very apparent that he did not believe in mediums at all. Okay, and when you have those conversations with people who like they're asking you questions and they're pretending to be curious, but you really can tell that they've already made up their mind, and they're not curious at all. They're actually just trying to ask you questions to be able to poke holes in your own opinion so that they basically can manipulate you to agree with them, right? Like it's those kind of manipulative conversations, and they don't feel good when they're happening, right? And so for me, when I'm in a situation like that, what happens is I actually feel it in my gut. Like I actually feel a bit of anger in my gut. And because I like to make people feel good, I don't really like to be confrontational. I typically would suppress that. But then what ends up happening is I shut down. And it's not like I'm pretty feisty. I can usually say my opinions, but in those specific situations, sometimes I'll just shut down and I get angry. And what's happening is that's my body and what I believe my soul telling me, like, this is a huge violation. Not because they disagree with me, but because of the way that they're diminishing my own opinion. And like, essentially, I don't exist in that. It had nothing, the conversation had nothing to do with who I was, my opinions, my thoughts. All it had to do was that person manipulating me to agree with them, essentially, right? And no matter what I said, it didn't matter. And it got to the point. So my old self, before I really learned to embrace these emotions, like if I don't listen to emotions like that, what ends up happening is I get angry and angrier and angrier until I blow up, or I don't say anything, but then I leave completely resentful. And then I go into a bit of a shame cycle because I'm like, well, why did I react that way? And why didn't I just tell that person I didn't, agree with this? And why didn't I stand up for myself? And it just becomes this whole crazy, stupid cycle of me just not feeling good about myself and being bitter towards that person, right? And so that is what happens for me when I ignore emotions, like in that specific situation. Now, in this specific time, because I'm becoming more aware, I was like, interesting. Like, I literally could observe it. I was like, how interesting that this is coming up, because I don't necessarily care. Like, I'm of the opinion if people don't agree with me and they don't believe in mediumship, that's totally cool. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not here to convince anybody. But yeah, it was interesting because I was like, okay, so this is violating a boundary for me. It's not okay. And he just kept going no matter what I was trying to, be polite and redirect the conversation. And it wasn't happening. So finally I was like, you know what? It doesn't really matter because you obviously don't believe in this, and nothing I can say will actually convince you. And he kind of went to rebut that, and I literally, it was really awkward. I literally physically turned and started talking to somebody else. Literally, it was like the most awkward moment ever. But I wasn't angry when I was leaving. Obviously I was kind of like, well, who is he to do that? But at the same time, it was like, I didn't ignore my own emotions. I didn't put him before myself, and I stood up for myself in a really, indirect way without being confrontational. It wasn't a good situation to necessarily be confrontational. But anyways, so, that is a situation where I learned to listen to my emotions. And, like I said, for me, that was telling me that a boundary was being crossed. And so was it a negative emotion? Yes. And should I have maybe handled it differently? Maybe. But the point of the matter is that the emotions were more of me telling myself, and like I say, for me, it's my soul speaking to me, but me telling myself, like, this isn't going to lead to anything positive for me. And so I need to remove myself from this situation in any way possible, even if it's super awkward, right? and without necessarily without letting it build up and reacting in a way that's really pretty inappropriate, right? Because I think that's oftentimes when we filter ourselves, is that we're used to not listening to our emotions, not expressing them. Because you got to remember, emotions are energies. They need to move, okay? They need to move somehow. And if we suppress them, that energy just gets like more erratic and more erratic and more erratic until we blow up. And oftentimes when we live like that, where we blow up, I find that's when we just don't know how to appropriately shift that energy, that we don't know, we almost feel ashamed to be able to express any forms of anger, and not understanding that sometimes anger is appropriate. And so, yeah, I mean, that's kind of a bit of my own experiences, but of course there's a million examples I could be doing that, could be sharing about, listening to our emotions and how they really can guide us to be more connected to ourselves, which to me, of course, is spirituality. And so I'm going to kind of cut it off there, mostly because my back is starting to kill me. But I want to use that as a question for you, is to really think about, do you label emotions as good and bad? And if you do, or any other label really, like, do you label emotions? And if you do, how is that influencing the way that you react to those emotions and move through them? Anyways, I hope you guys have a great week, and I am sending you all lots of love.